just spinning. Oh, here we go. Welcome to Establish the Edge. I'm your host, Mike Leone. Really excited for today's episode. Going to take a look at how to win the FFPC main event. If you're not familiar with the FFPC main event, we're going to run through the rules of that and the prize structure for that. But it's a fun overall fantasy football tournament that anybody can join. I've got Pat Kerrane and Pete Overzet from Ship Chasing, who have done plenty of these drafts in the past to talk through it. But before we dive into today's episode, do want to note that the podcast is brought to you by Underdog Fantasy. Absurd $2 million to first right now in their Best Ball Mania 3 contest. $1 million to second place. Also $1 million prize to regular season points champions. So a few different ways to take your crack at winning $1 million on Underdog. If you use promo code ETR when you first sign up, they're going to match your deposit up to $100. So unbelievable contest. It's also a really good contest to get you prepared for your home leagues. Nothing better than doing actual drafts for actual cash. So visit Underdog Fantasy and use promo code ETR for up to $100 in free entries. All right, let's jump back to managed season-long fantasy football. Pat, Pete, thanks so much for joining me. I know you guys have done a bunch of FFPC main events over the years, and you're planning to do a bunch on Ship Chasing in the coming weeks. Pat, I'll throw it to you first. You want to just talk through this structure of FFPC? And I mentioned they have $1 million prize pool as well up top. How does one go about actually winning that?
Yeah, so these are 12-team leagues where it's full PPR, but tight end premium, so 1.5 PPR for tight ends. It's a 1 quarterback, 2 running back, 2 wide receiver, 1 tight end, 2 flexes, and then kicker and defense is your lineup. And you're competing in a 12-week regular season, and you can earn basically a ticket to the main playoffs or the championship playoffs, where you have a chance to take down that $1 million by just winning your league outright in season. There's 2 teams that get automatic berths to that round, or you can win your league in the playoffs, which are weeks 13 and 14. If you're the overall playoff champion of your individual league, there's some money that comes with that, but then you also get a berth to the championship playoffs. So you're going to have 2 to 3 teams from each 12-team league, then entering this kind of total points championship round, weeks 15, 16, and 17. You score the most points in there, you get $1 million.
Yeah, so it's an interesting tournament. There's a few ways to make that overall playoffs, also short and regular season. So there's different things that are going to affect your strategy in this tournament. The short and regular season, the really top heavy prizes in the playoffs. It's $1 million, as I said, to first, which is awesome. It does drop down to $200,000 to second, $100,000 to third, $50,000 to fourth. So it's very top heavy, a lot of focus on those playoff weeks. You do get, prizes for being the 1 seed, 2 seed in your league or winning that league playoffs that Pat mentioned. So different ways to make money along the way. Peter, as far as the overall component with it being so top heavy, are there any things that have jumped out to you guys right away that you're tweaking your strategy from what a regular 12-team league would look like?
Yeah, and it definitely is a mental shift if you are coming from Underdog. Some of us hot dog costume have been talking about how all of the value is in week 17 and all that matters, when you're doing a $25 entry and the expected value on that's so low, until you get to that championship week. Whereas with FFPC, we're talking real cash here on your, $1,700, $1,800 entry. You have $4,000 or $4,500 if you take the ticket to first in your just individual 12-man league. So winning your 12-man league is far more important here from an expected value standpoint than it is in an Underdog best ball draft or even an FFPC best ball draft. So that's just kind of one shift there. And I would say one thing that Pat and I have gotten burned on in the past is not getting off to a fast enough start. I think you could argue that we were maybe building teams that we thought could really come on strong in the fantasy playoffs and then just forgot to get into the fantasy playoffs. So, that's something you really do have to balance. And then the weeks 15 through 17 stuff is interesting because I do think you're trying to win a sprint there and you're obviously trying to build the best possible team. But I think there are some things we can look at as far as schedules, also just looking at the archetype of players who can generally come on stronger weeks 15 through 17. And then it's kind of a balancing and layering thing with who are the guys that can get me into the playoffs, but then supercharge it. So you want to be very purposeful when you are selecting a guy like DeAndre Hopkins, who's going to miss 6 weeks. It needs to be in a build where you can withstand that early and making sure you're not giving up too many points where you get in a hole.
And to the Hopkins point, I think just understanding you're going to have to hold that guy on your roster, and he's going to eat up a roster spot for those whole 6 weeks as well with waiver wire, compared to best ball like that. There's a lot of opportunity costs in having that guy taking up that roster spot. So the type of like wide receiver build that might allow you to not use Hopkins might also be the type of build where you really need to churn those roster spots because you're a little bit weaker at running back than the rest of your league. So you got to think through all that stuff.
Yeah, the 12-week regular season to get into the league playoffs, and then only 4 teams getting into league playoffs. You've got your crack in the overall playoffs. Definitely changes thing. I know we're all fans of wide receiver heavy drafting, possibly going 0 RB, and that seems a little bit harder versus, if you're in a traditional 12-man league, 12-person league, and it's a 14-week regular season, you've got a couple more weeks to make the playoffs. And a lot of those leagues, more teams make the playoffs, right? Like 6 out of 12 might make the playoffs. This is 2 weeks shorter. 4 out of 12 teams are getting a crack to even get into the overall playoffs. So yeah, getting off to that fast start is somewhat imperative. You can't fall too far behind. You might be in position to be the 5th seed and feel like you have an absolute hammer team for the playoff stretch, but if you don't make it, it doesn't matter. So at running back, has that affected how you guys draft at all?
Go for it, Pat.
Well, it certainly makes some archetypes a little bit more appealing. Like we drafted Devin Singletary in the 8th round of the first main event that we did this year, and he was a faller there. This is before all the Zach Moss buzz, but still feel like the like Devin Singletary hitting scenarios this season are probably where he has a much stronger first half of the season than second half, because you would imagine James Cook at some point is going to be a real thorn in his side. But that's probably fine for us because Devin Singletary was our first running back selected. We selected a ton of running backs after Devin Singletary. We're going to be super, super active on the waiver wire. So having a guy like Devin Singletary, maybe like a Chase Edmonds, someone kind of in that range you can expect to really help you in the early part of the season for a very cheap price can be really, really helpful for 0 running back builds.
Yeah, the archetype stuff, I think, super important. I mean, once you pass a certain point in the draft at almost any position, but especially at running back, how the player's archetype fits into your build matters so much, whether it's managed or best ball. And so getting those guys that have, dare I say, usable weeks in them, right off the bat is pretty important. And you can mix them with the pure upside throws, because sometimes people are like, oh, why is this guy ahead of this guy in the running back rankings? So I'm like, well, it kind of doesn't matter. Like, this guy's pure upside handcuff. If you want to take him, like a Tyrion Davis price, for example, like that's a swing at the fences, but you're not really expecting anything from base. Whereas you might take someone like a JD McKissick, like just to be like, okay, we can roll out this pass catcher for a bit. But earlier in the draft, are you more likely to do, a hero RB build where you build around one stud running back and hope he's kind of the running back that hits? Or is it kind of the same to you as a regular 12-team league?
I mean, in that first main event we did, and we now have almost 3 slow drafts under our belt, it really, the anchor thing definitely comes down to where you're at with tight end. And one thing that we feel very strongly about is prioritizing that elite tight end. You can see there's kind of a clear 5 that are going off the board in drafts. And what's interesting is Waller and Kittle are actually slipping a little bit. We got them at 311 in our most recent slow draft. That's Waller. And so in this draft, we prioritize Kyle Pitts here, and we kind of basically have to make the decision, right? Do you want to go anchor running back? I think we could have done it with Jones or Javonte for sure. Or do we want to prioritize the elite tight end there? So I do think it's a conversation you have to have in it. Similar when we talk about it with best ball, it's like, where are you sliding your resources? For us, because we knew we were headed, like when you draft Kyle Pitts, that really frees you up to not have to, reach on some of these other tight ends. You can see a ton go off in the 10th through 12th round. Those were picks we needed on running backs in a 0 RB build. So I do think it's kind of preference and has to do with draft slot. But I would say about this specific draft, that's 0 RB, when we do it, we really want to make sure we are beating opponents basically everywhere except running back. So get the elite tight end, get the elite quarterback, and obviously be loaded at wide receiver. And I think that's where zero RB can still be extremely powerful in this format.
Yeah. And to Pat's point about the archetypical running backs you guys were taking, you can see Singletary, Carter, Gainwell. Those are all guys that have kind of a combination of upside and base value, which is a nice way to kick it off, understanding you need to fill those spots and get some points before you start going for like bigger swing, like on Jerick McKinnon or Deonta Foreman, who, they could be zeros to start, but they also have a pretty meaningful ceiling. You bring up the elite onesies if you're going zero RB, and not even if you're going zero RB. I have a tough time not going elite onesie. I feel like I want to do it in every draft this year, and I managed to tweak the format to fit my thought that you should attack elite onesies, no matter what the format is. But especially in this overall contest where you've got these 3 weeks, 15 to 17, that are going to decide it. It's just tough for me to see someone that doesn't have a top tier tight end and a quarterback with some juice being able to get there over a 3-week span. I mean, wide receiver and running back, we just know there's going to be breakouts and whatnot a little bit later in the draft that we can target. It seems to me like the other positions, the ceiling just gets a little bit capped. And if you're in a traditional 12-team league, it can kind of be like, that's okay. I don't need to crush everyone at tight end because I'm going to have such a clean roster throughout. But when you're looking at getting, a 99th percentile outcome, I definitely do tend to err on wanting an elite onesie. And with it being tight end premium, that's of course magnified here.
Especially, I think at tight end where like no one's catching you by having 3 to 4 tight ends who, the guy who scores the touchdown gets slotted into their lineup. Like you have to pick every week in the championship round, and of course every other week as well, but who you're putting in. So if you have a guy like Kyle Pitts, let's say he has the season we're hoping for, or whoever that elite tight end ends up being that really crushes, just slotting them in every week is such a massive advantage in a tight end premium format.
So looking at the team that won it last year, a team from Western New York, Go Bills was the name of the team. They did, I'll actually pull this team up on screen, but they did basically
so Go Bills teams won both of the
yes.
tournament.
It was a very good year in Western New York for fantasy football. It was $500,000 first prize last year. They get it. So they did a few things that we've kind of talked about a little bit. They went hero running back with Jonathan Taylor, and then they must have pounded wide receiver. I don't have the full draft, but they started Jamar Chase, Cooper Kupp, Deebo Samuel, Tyreek Hill in the final week, which is essentially like our dream, right? Like we want to be starting for top 10 to 15 wide receivers is the ideal setup in that type of format. They must have
Tyreek would have been the first pick, then what?
They must have gone Tyreek, JT. I'm guessing they went Tyreek, JT.
Then Andrews.
Then
Kupp.
Then Chase. Then Javonte. Or maybe they got Chase in the 6th.
They probably went Javonte Chase at the 5-6 turn, and then Deebo after that, because Deebo was really slipping on FFPC.
Yeah.
So they obviously hit the parlay at wide receiver, which is hard to do, and part of the reason why sometimes we'll forego that hero running back, which is you're not going to hit this. You're not going to go 4 for 4 on your first 4 wide receiver picks. Like you want 6 or 7 to give yourself a chance to have 4 wide receivers that are this good. They did hit the parlay, which kind of allowed them to do hero running back while still taking an elite tight end and, a late season breakout candidate in Javonte Williams. Quarterback, they didn't grab an elite guy, but it was a guy with like some upside and some juice, and they stacked. So they get the Burrow Chase stack for those 3 weeks. How imperative is stacking to you guys in this format?
Well, we actually had a chance to do a Burrow double because we did Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, and we didn't end up taking Burrow. We took Kyler Murray, which maybe you could argue we should have taken Burrow. But Pete was pointing out just how strong Kyler Murray's schedule is in the playoffs. And so that kind of jumped out to us, like having Kyler from weeks 15 through 17 with this incredible schedule. And we actually did end up getting a stack with him because we have Marquise Brown. So we have this kind of like fast start pairing, although again, before the Brown hamstring and arrested stuff, fast start pairing with Marquise Brown and Kyler Murray. Kyler Murray doesn't have a bye throughout the regular season. His bye is actually in the league playoffs, which might not matter if we get an automatic berth to the championship round. Obviously, we want to win our league as well. But if you're just thinking about like path to the biggest money, it's you get a guy who has all 13 weeks, all 12 weeks, excuse me, in the regular season. They can get you the automatic berth and then a great playoff schedule. So we did have a stack here with Kyler, but we didn't go with the more obvious stack in Burrow. So I think important, but maybe not like we didn't get locked into an obvious one.
Yeah, and my thought there too, and because I mean the Bengals don't have a good week 15 through 17 schedule. I know people are excited about the hammer game against the Bills to close out the year, but that's an outdoor weather game in January there too. So my kind of thought is maybe you get a scenario similar to last year where Higgins and Chase are ping-ponging big weeks, and then you have Kyler who's able to match Joe Burrow just because of his rushing upside and a nicer schedule there. So you could definitely argue that, maybe we're like slightly hedging there. But I do think the way that sprint works, you really are trying to maximize every possible spot. And it's like, if Burrow goes off, we're still going to be very excited to have Chase and Higgins in those same. So I have a hard time seeing how that really burns us. And I think it just gives us even access to maybe more points we wouldn't get in a traditional double.
The other difference, I mean, if you look at what they did last year, Burrow was a later pick. I mean, we had an NFFC team that was actually kind of similar to this team, even though it was a self-contained 12-team league where we took Burrow to stack with Chase. And Burrow was kind of like that QB 10 to 12-ish that, had a little bit of juice. Obviously, he's going much earlier this year, and I don't think like in a vacuum, the ceiling's just much better on Kyler Murray. To you guys' point about the playoff schedule, Cincinnati's average team total weeks 15 through 17. Is this 2022? Yeah, 2022. I had to do a double take because I didn't even believe it. Because it's less than Jacksonville's average team total right now.
Wow.
For weeks 15 through 17. It's at 21.58.
Wow.
What's Arizona's at?
This at Tampa Bay, at New England, home versus Buffalo.
Yeah.
So Arizona's is at 24.75. That's it. And I know from doing like DFS modeling, you might be like, 3 point. Like that's a significant difference from some of the DFS modeling I've done. Especially, I mean, that's a significant difference for 1 week, a 3 point higher team total. You compound that times 3 weeks. It's a pretty big deal. So yeah, definitely check out the schedules. The teams up top seem like they all make sense. Cincinnati definitely an outlier as far as a team down low though. That's a really low total for an offense of their caliber. So looking at some other dynamics, Pat, you brought up the bye week stuff, which I totally forgot honestly going into this, but would your preference be to have a team that has mostly not buys in the regular season to try and lock up that playoff spot and get the 1 and 2 seed money? Or
I think the thing to realize is that the market has a take on this. The market generally prefers guys who do not have bye weeks in weeks 13 and 14 because those guys are missing, especially 14, right? Because you're missing the championship game of your league playoffs, which there's some serious money in winning your league playoff, your league in the playoffs. So it is uncomfortable to have, one of your top picks with a week 14 bye. So that generally has meant that those guys are discounted to an extent. Like Jonathan Taylor, who I believe again has a week 14 bye and had one last year, he was partially discounted because of that. And so you're seeing Dalton Cates had an incredible team in the main event last year that got, I think, Jonathan Taylor at the 211, if I remember right. Just like some crazy stuff like that. So you will see discounts on these guys that reflect that usually, at least to an extent. And my feeling on it is, even if you kind of prefer maybe the guy not have a bye week in the in the league playoffs, if you're getting that discount and you also have some other advantages, you get all of their weeks in the regular season to help you earn the automatic berth, maybe it all kind of comes out in the wash and you're getting this free discount.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. All right, any like galaxy brain ideas for this contest? I think we've gone over kind of like a good idea of the base strategy and what we're looking to accomplish, but you guys have done this a lot over the years. You've streamed your drafts. Just kind of curious if there's anything you've picked up on, whether it's, it could be specific to FFPC or just in general, but learning from these FFPC main events that you've done in the past.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple fun, unique dynamics to this main contest. Like even the first draft you pulled up for us, and some people might be looking at some of those values being like, oh, that's weird. Well, we started that draft on July 4th. That was a slow draft. So a lot has changed. And even the market dynamics, we took what? Did we get Rojo in this one? No, we got Jarek McKinnon, but now you'll see Isaiah
Rojo
Pacheco
went 901.
He went 901. Isaiah Pacheco is now going in like the 12th and 13th round in some of these
with
current
Rojo not selected.
So crazy.
Yeah. So
I'm like, that's okay. Yeah.
Oh, no. Sorry. The point I was getting to with a unique thing is then all the way up to we're going to be going out to Vegas to draft live in these. And there's one really unique dynamic where a good chunk of the live drafts happen after the Thursday night game. So if you're going out there and you're drafting after, you get the knowledge of what happens in that Bills Rams opener. And that really can flip some of the ADPs on its head. Like you can see here, Cam Akers, middle 4th round pick. I'll tell you right now, if Cam Akers scores 2 touchdowns in that opening game, he will be a 1st round pick in the rest of those drafts. And so that can work in either direction, right? Like if we love Stephon Diggs and you have that 108, 109, you're hoping he falls and he pops off, he's going top 5 now, and you might miss out on him. So that's one really unique thing. And then on top of that, there is now that secondary waiver run after the Thursday night games. So we like to do a thing we call the take a peek, where if the guy's not in your starting lineup, but you have them stashed on the bench, ideally it would be a backup running back. You basically can get this free information from the Thursday night game. Say a starting running back gets injured, your guy gets vaulted into a role. Let's say with this Thursday night game, maybe you stash Kyren Williams. If something happened to Cam Akers or Hendo, maybe now all of a sudden Kyren Williams' value went up. If nothing happens, he doesn't see the field, you just toss him back in on the next waiver wire. So those are a few little FFPC quirks that I think you can take advantage of.
Yeah, as long as you don't start the guy, you can toss him back. And then we haven't done this probably enough in the early drafts, but if you draft Bills Rams, you can for sure that you can put them in your lineup to the point about Cam Akers. Because like Cam Akers would probably be not just a 1st round pick, but he'd probably be like the 106 if he scores 2 touchdowns.
Yeah.
And in general, one thing to keep in mind with kind of your opponents in FFPC leagues is that people do seem very willing to just go off the board in terms of ADP in a way that I think makes things more challenging. Like no one's like afraid to reach on a guy they think has a lot of upside. Like the Pacheco thing, he just went in the 13th round of the slow draft that we're doing. But like, I don't know, that's like defensible at that point. Like a lot of running backs are off and they're just like, I'm taking a big swing and I don't care what his ADP is over the last 5 days or whatever. I'm paying attention to the news. I'm hearing a drumbeat and I'm just going to go with that. You see that a lot in the FFPC, and that dynamic will steam up running backs who have good narratives late in the summer. So the thing that's always stuck with me is Darwin Thompson and Justice Hill both got into the 7, 8, 9 round range by the time that we were drafting in Vegas. And so if your plan is to go 0 running back and you go into Vegas with the idea that you're going to scoop what we did in this draft here, where we got Michael Carter in the 11th, Kenneth Gainwell in the 12th, and then, Jarek McKinnon was a little bit of a reach there. Deontay Foreman, Jamal Williams, I think pretty nice pure contingent value plays in the 14th and 15th. You're not going to have this group of running backs. Like either we're going to know like, oh, you just don't want to be straight up. You do not want to be drafting Foreman, or you do not want to be drafting Gainwell. Or if we still think those are the guys, they're going to be going like 2-3 rounds earlier than they are right now. So you actually, I think, want to build that into your structure a little bit. Like I'm way more interested in going anchor running back in Vegas. Like once you're there, days before the season, where I know the 2v2s I'm looking at are going to be probably are going to favor the early running back build. And also like maybe I'm taking just one less running back overall in the build. It gives me a little bit more flexibility where I don't have to force and reach and take a guy who's like, well, most of the upside's priced in now. Let's say Rashad White's going in the 7th or something by the time we get to Vegas. So,
and that kind of goes back to Leone's earlier point about the anchor RB preference and why I think it is a little comfier to go 0 RB early on, knowing we can get those guys that otherwise can shoot up. Whereas come like main event time, if you're doing that 0 RB build, I mean, the attractive options are gone because that dynamic is, if you're doing a 0 RB build, we're racing to fill our flex with wide receivers and then move over to the running backs. But the FFPC drafters are often racing to fill their flex with running backs. So you basically converge where it's like, we're trying to get our running back 1 and they're going, hey, we're trying to get our running back 4 for our starting lineup. And they often will even win out in that race to get those running backs before you. And then you can really get squeezed out, which is why that Devin Singletary in that first draft felt like such a gift, because he is a guy that I think can help get us off to a fast start. If James Cook is slow to come along, I think everyone agrees he'll have a role right out of the gate. So yeah, it can be a little dicier doing 0 RB later in the draft season.
Even Kenny Gainwell, getting him in the 12th was, I think, a real gift and not something that was even happening at the time by ADP. That was a big faller. But yeah, to Pete's point about guys trying to fill their flex with running backs, that creates a dynamic where, yes, you're seeing running backs go early, but more early than you are like on underdog, but you're also seeing that tier of running backs, kind of like the premium 0 running back target list. That tier on underdog lasts for several rounds. Like, let's say it starts around round 9. There's still guys from that tier pretty comfortably in round 12, because teams generally on underdog, if they go running backs early, they're taking wide receivers or quarterbacks or tight ends in those rounds. And so not every single team is attacking that high upside running back tier. But in FFPC, that's not the case. You look at the most recent draft that we've done, we took Rashad White at the 10:02. Following Rashad White, it went Darrell Henderson, Isaiah Spiller, Damian Pierce, J.D. McKissick, Nyheim Hines, Alexander Madison. And then Tyler Algier went off at the end of the round. And before it got back to us, James Robinson, Khalil Herbert, and Michael Carter had also gone. So the whole tier before it gets back to us, we took Tyrion Davis-Price, who I would argue is probably in a slightly lower tier than those other guys, so that we kicked off the tier with Rashad White. The entire tier was gone before it came back to us.
Yeah, I'm guessing you've got less people drafting, backup quarterbacks and backup tight ends at that point too, which makes it a little easier for them to just continuing to hammer running back. But with it being so different, Pat, is it mostly you think the running back group's getting squeezed where we're like cutting out the guys that we know don't have jobs and then boosting all the guys that we know are like backups or continuing in the hype? Or is there a position that's falling? Like how is it happening that these running backs? Because I specifically remember that exact year you mentioned with Justice Hill and Darwin Thompson, and doing what you said to be careful of, which was basically went into a draft with Dink, I think it was, and we planned to go 0 RB, and we had those guys pegged for like 11th, 12th round, and they go in 9, and we didn't even sniff them, and then we're running out of guys to like, who do we even want to take? Like, this is getting the upside shelf at least was getting barren fast.
The other dynamic that's happening this year in FFPC drafts, where I would say I would call it like the sharp FFPC build in years past from guys who I respect and have a long history of drafting on there. They would, draft their 2 elite running backs and then really stay away from it, avoid the dead zone. That would be kind of like the classic sharp FFPC draft. They've definitely adjusted to this new landscape where they're completely willing to take a Devontae Adams, a Stephon Diggs, and almost do the anchor wide receiver and then go to running back. So like you'll see a guy take Devontae Adams in the first round and you'll be like, oh, is this a 0 RB drafter? And then they'll take, Derrick Henry in the second, Joe Mixon in the second. So it's like, you can't peg them as that archetype because they're reacting to these new dynamics. And that makes it even trickier to navigate as a 0 RB drafter because sometimes those guys that used to fall to you, like Adams and Diggs at the turn, they're not there anymore because these guys feel so comfortable with the running backs in the second and third right now.
So this guy from the most recent draft out of the 8 hole, he scoops Devontae Adams at 108, but then he takes Derrick Henry in the second, which is a falling value. Scoops DJ Moore in the third. So at this point, you're like, well, he took the Henry value, no fault there, and he's got Adams and DJ Moore. Then he goes David Montgomery and Antonio Gibson. with 2 of his next 3
Wow.
picks. So it is like hard to peg. It's like there's guys want to play running backs in their flex a lot in this format, but that doesn't mean they're not going to scoop some of those really desirable wide receiver values that we'd also like to have. But in general, to the question about like positions falling, I do think there's some kind of like all running backs seem to go a little earlier to like, yes, you're not going to be able to hammer that tier that you think you're going to be able to hammer in round 10 or 11. But then also like even pass catching running backs with a pulse. Like I remember a couple years ago, this wouldn't even have been a good pick, but we like really wanted Jalen Richard. We're like, Jalen Richard's like such a good like guy who can help get us through the
Put
early
that on the
weeks as a
ship
pass
chasing
catcher.
tombstone. We really wanted Jalen Richard.
So yeah, because like we're kind of in this position where we don't have enough, like not even running back upside, but like running back guys we can
Just
plausibly
play at
start.
all. Yeah.
Yeah. So this guy's like, it comes back to us like 2 picks before us, like wrapping back around in like the 12th or something. He's like, Jalen Richard? Like, you don't even know his name.
Are you kidding me?
But I was just going to
FFPC
say,
does. Oh, go ahead.
I'll go for it. No, go.
I was going to say FFPC does do a good job of as much as like a single quarterback non-best ball league can do of evening some stuff out by having, the passers are 1 point per 20 yards passing, which gives a little bit more juice to the guys that can rack up passing yardage. You get the tight end premium scoring, and then you also even out 2 wide receivers, 2 running backs with 2 flexes rather than like NFFC, which is 3 wide receivers, 1 running back, and a flex. And NFFC used to be great when people undervalued wide receiver because like they really paid for it, right? Like if they did that with that setup. FFPC is a weird wrinkle where people aren't paying for that as much because they can start 2 running backs in the flex and they don't have to start that 3rd wide receiver where they could just get massacred. But by the same token, it makes it easier to go wide receiver heavy because people know that, and the ADPs, especially now as we're seeing the landscape in general shift a little bit with wide receivers going earlier, it's like harder to find the edge on NFFC, whereas like FFPC, because there's more flexibility, I think that's, edge persists a bit more.
And I'm glad you brought QBs. That's what the direction I was about to go in, where I do think that's the one place where it definitely feels different, and maybe the market there hasn't fully reacted to the power of those elite quarterbacks. And, a dynamic we've been finding ourselves in our drafts is like these guys like, Lamar and Mahomes can be available in the 7th round, and you're kind of really wrestling with this opportunity cost of, hey, yeah, these really promising, rookies, like Burks and Sky Moore, and then you got like Tony in this range. Do we pass on them to get this elite quarterback at what we would consider a value? Or because these quarterbacks are getting pushed down, do we just wait for a Lance, a Burrow, a Wilson, a Brady in the 9th or 10th? And it gets a little scary because you're like, man, I could build a super team that I feel happy with if I sit and wait on the quarterbacks. But then you're also like, do I want to risk a QB run happening and then feeling the tier break from like a Lance down to a Stafford or Carr starts to feel pretty big. And so that's just been an interesting thing of like, how willing are you to play chicken with the quarterback values, knowing that they're pretty good options from round 6 through 10 on.
One thing that I've been thinking through as we kind of plan ahead to, drafting late in the season and in Vegas and stuff is we have taken an elite quarterback in every one of our early drafts so far. But if you think about, okay, I can, in these early drafts, draft wide receivers at will in the early rounds. I'm not going to be super strong running back. Maybe I have an anchor build at running back, or maybe I've gone true zero running back. So kind of more of a desire to get that elite quarterback and the elite tight end to make sure I'm crushing at all the non-running back positions. If in Vegas, I'm like potentially doing an anchor running back build, and I'm not, I'm feeling like maybe I'm not going to get those running backs that I really want in the zero running back range. Maybe a 10, 11 round quarterback starts to look more appealing. And we are seeing like Russell Wilson went in the 10th round of this draft we're doing here. Dak Prescott went in the 11th. So if those ADPs persist, then I think that's potentially a pivot where we've tended to go like 7th round elite quarterback in the early drafts. Maybe we start to look at early double-digit round quarterback later on in the year.
One last thing, and we'll be brief because this could be its own episode, but just like general waiver wire advice in the main event. I know, Pat, we did, I think, an ETE episode where you changed my mindset a little bit. I think you were talking about how you targeted Justin Herbert early in his rookie year, even though you didn't necessarily have a need at quarterback. And I know like some of my flaws, like working fab sometimes, are just trying to address strengths and getting like hyper focused on that and not worrying about, the positions that I'm quote unquote good at. And essentially you took more the approach of let's stockpile upside and talent. And, it's a chaotic season. Like it's going to sort itself out. So just any general, brief waiver advice for people that are, participating in the main event.
I think one thing that I'm trying to get better at is just like realizing that like those early week waiver wire runs, if you hit a guy there, just how much better that is. Cause you think like that week one, as it's happening, like it always feels a little bit like underwhelming to me in terms of like what it has unlocked in terms of running back value. But then if you look back at seasons past, it was not underwhelming. We had Myles Gaskin, James Robinson, Cordero Patterson,
Eli Mitchell.
Like there were some massive developments, but we weren't sure which ones to buy into. If you remember 2 years ago with the Myles Gaskin stuff, he was not the big waiver wire pickup. Malcolm Brown scored a touchdown, I think, and went above him in a number of fab bids. And Nyheim Hines also had a really strong week one that year. So people weren't necessarily flocking to Gaskin. You have to read the signals correctly, which can be tough. But I think like just being more aggressive in week one than we have in years past. And certainly we were plenty aggressive on Eli Mitchell. I think we put in bids of like 950 of $1,000 fab and still didn't get him. So the market, I think, correctly reacted. They reacted appropriately to Eli Mitchell by going all in, but you won't always see that. And if you can hit on one of those guys right away, it just makes the season so much easier.
All right. You can check Pat and Pete out on Ship Chasing. Why don't you, Pete, let people know what you guys have in store over the next couple of weeks over there?
Yeah, I'm actually going to post our schedule later today because, we are basically booked out until we head to Vegas. We're super excited Wednesday night. We're having Sean Siegel on from RotoViz, one of the best FFPC players out there. Going to really pick his brain on how he's feeling about these main event and, football guys tournaments as well. And then hopefully get a sneak peek of his 0 RB target list as well. So if you're wanting to kind of extend this thought on FFPC strategy, I think you guys will like that show on Wednesday. Also, I should just put a plug in for our last show on Wednesday that Leone was a part of. Leone ran a legit 5K while we drafted a second underdog team there. So if you haven't checked that out, I highly recommend it. True alpha play by Leone. And then, after that, we're going to be drafting main event teams almost twice a week until the start of the season. We have some fun double headers lined up, Wednesday, Thursday evening shows, drafting with all of our friends, Davis Maddock, Crack Rock, another one with Sean, our RotoViz guys, Hassan and Blair. I'm sure I'm forgetting someone. Also our Ship Chasing VIPs. So if you're looking for FFPC main event draft streams, Ship Chasing is going to be the place to be over the next month.
Yeah, you can also check out Pat's work over at NBC Sports Ads. What's that, Pat?
Well, you've kind of famously accused us of jumping the shark on Wednesday for not drafting Josh Jacobs, who then proceeded to play all the preseason snaps. Are you starting to sweat it all there?
No, this is another blown out of proportion. Dude plays all the running backs play. He plays 2 series and everyone's freaking out. And he was the clear starter and looked fine. Okay. Listen, we just did a podcast where we mentioned Justice Hill and Darwin Thompson going in round 9. So
that's true.
Let's cut some 8th round Josh Jacobs and best ball a little bit of slack. But I'm sure I'll sweat it if he's not starting week 1. Then I'll feel like a donkey. If you want some entertaining draft streams over at ETR as well, me, Silva, and Levitan are going to be drafting an FFPC main event at some point last week. We need Levitan in there. Me and Silva drafted an NFFC team. It was a very entertaining stream, but a little bit of a shit show as far as me and Silva coordinating on the fly who we're going to draft. So
I can't wait for that. That will be a fun one with all 3 of you in the mix.
That'll be fun.
Yeah, I'm trying to convince. I think we should live stream it, but I know you guys have, yeah, you guys are live streaming your main event drafts, right? The non-slows.
Yeah,
Yes.
there's no running from it. I mean, you got to give the
Yeah.
people, you sacrifice a little EV for the entertainment. That's how it works.
That's
He
what I
hasn't-
think
He
too.
hasn't drafted a team that he hasn't live streamed in about 18 months.
Michael Dubner recently posted my stats in our ship chasing Discord, and he had stats for 70 of my live stream drafts. And I was like, oh my God.
What is
I mean,
happening?
Maybe next year my content goal should be to max, the big tournaments all on stream. Just exclusively.
That would
with
be
stream
pretty
draft.
amazing. I think he can pull it off.
I feel like the worst EV part is getting the wrong people in your draft by telegraphing it ahead of time. Whereas once it's filled, I'm like, okay, we're live streaming. If people want to hear what we're saying
Yeah.
and we're screwing them up, like that almost seems like it could be an advantage. I mean, to an extent.
Last week I do my best ball streams on my channel on Monday mornings, and I call it the Reg Bad Brigade. It's all the experienced players that hop in those drafts, and I faked them out last week. I got into the draft before they could tell I did, and they were very upset. They were, I sidestepped them. So I'm starting to get creative with this.
I love it.
As these experienced pros start to win money in these best ball championships and stuff, they're gonna be able to spend a little bit more money on these FFPC
Yeah.
drafts. So I'm starting to get a little worried our main event drafts might start to look like our best ball drafts where all the wide receivers get snapped up.
All right. But yeah, make sure to check out Pat Pete on Ship Chasing. As they noted, I was on last week. It was a very fun episode. Eric Beinford, Ben Gretsch were on as well. You can find all my stuff over at Established to Run. Make sure you check out our draft kit. We've got ranked specifically for FFPC managed leagues that'll help you navigate your main event. Thank you for tuning in, everybody. Best of luck this season.